So if there's no one already, DM, my time starts now. Good evening, honorable judges. We affirm definition, welfare coming categories of healthcare, education, job skills, public housing, food assistance, etc. Contention 1, aging. Step 1A, tackling increasing aging crisis. In China, the share of the population over 60 years of age is now projected to rise from 17.4% in 2020 to 35% in 2050. It is expected that China's 65-year-old population will reach 487 million. That's an increase of 241 million people. The current retirement age in China is 60 years old. Retirement means they will lose their constant incomes to sustain their life. Nearly a quarter of elderly people in China live below the poverty line, according to China Health and Retirement Longevity Study at Peking University in Beijing. Increased spending in pension system will help the society cope with the growing frustration of aging crisis, preventing 241 million people from falling into poverty in the status quo to future. But without increased central government subsidies, China's pension funds deficits projected to rise from 234 billion yuan in 2018 to 534 billion yuan by 2022. Already, nearly half of China's provinces are slated to report operating shortfalls in their basic pension funds by 2022, according to a report by the China Academy of Social Sciences. Step 1B, improve pension in rural areas to help migrant workers meet their living standard. On average, migrant workers would pay for equal funding into the pool of pension, but they don't receive enough welfare when they're retired. In 2017, there are 280 million migrant workers who really need insurance, but only 11% of them were covered by basic old age insurance. They barely receive 119 RMB per month. The living cost of rural citizens is about 1,200 yuan according to National Bureau of Statistics, and the gap between pensions in urban and rural areas are about 20 times. At least we must increase pensions to fit your living costs, which is 1,200 yuan per person per month in rural area. 89% of 280 million people need to be covered by net increase of pension by about 11,880 yuan. Increasing spending by about 3 billion yuan will make 250 million aging people in rural areas out of poverty and live with dignity. Overall, we will prevent 500 million Asian people from falling into poverty, but increased spending is the prerequisite of helping all these people. Contention 2. The vulnerable group people, such as disabled, need welfare to get out of poverty. China still has around 1.69 million disabled people registered to be living in poverty. Nearly half of them are severely disabled, and 472,000 of them are in need of nursing care. The Chinese healthcare system is transmitted to market-based. This means the individual, the employer, and the state share the financial responsibilities. Many people with disabilities are unemployed, and they cannot afford to purchase medical insurance. Only by providing welfare can we help them. Second way that we're helping them is providing rehabilitation services. It can actually improve their physical functioning and independent living skills of people with disabilities, with the end result of being able to facilitate their participation in both social life and their community. Contention 3, vocational education. For January to May, there is an increase of unemployment of 4.6 million people, and it is estimated the number will keep going. But the problems aren't the lack of job vacancies. The ratio between job vacancy and job seeker is about 1.2. China has the most job vacancies with manufacturers, social production services, and technicians. To make unemployed people go back to the market, they need vocational education to train their skills and increase their competitiveness because these work all need specific requirements. In 2019, 15 million people were trained by the programs and went back to work. At the State Council Executive Meeting 2019, assume the growth rate of unemployment is as same as 2019, we can make 90 million people being trained and most of them go back to work at the end of 2030. Overall, we have an impact of helping 500 million elderly people get out of poverty and providing 90 million people with jobs. That is why we urge a strong pro ballot. Thank you.
Okay, conside.
Okay. Sorry if I coughed around my speech. I sort of have a cold. So is everyone ready for constructive? Okay, time starts now. We negate the resolution framework. Both reducing poverty currently and preventing poverty in the future are important in today's debate. To reduce poverty, the aim should be to make people self-sustainable. Condition 1, economic growth. Economic growth is crucial to poverty alleviation. Han 2015 explains that the percentage of people in poverty decreases by 0.016% with every 1% increase in GDP per capita. As Savart B. Atlanta 2014 proves, public infrastructure leads to stable increases in agricultural productivity and industrialization, reducing income inequality, especially in rural areas. World Bank says that a 1% increase in infrastructure can reduce the Gini coefficient, which measures the income inequality by 0.06%. Rural villagers can replace excessive low-paying farming jobs with high-income urbanized jobs. Additionally, Hull states that the percentage of people living under a poverty line reduces by 1.32% as the employment rate increases by 1%. Now, condition 2, transportation. Project Partner says that most of the poor population in China lives in rural areas. Lack of access perpetuates their poverty. Subpoint A, e-commerce and tourism. Transportation helps e-commerce and tourism by lowering logistic costs. According to Leo 2020, the Jiangxi Expressway Network and the Sichuan Road Network created a total of 2 billion RMB of turnover and 4.8 million tourists with e-commerce, with 80% of townships and 32% of poor villagers getting lifted out of poverty. Subpoint B, rural businesses. Poor transportation also harms local businesses. According to Thornton 2018, local transport infrastructure is cited by nearly a quarter of Chinese businesses as a constraint on their growth. IISA shows that township and village enterprises, or the TVEs, are restricted by deficient rural infrastructure and poor transportation. With the increased transportation as mentioned by Tong, the number of TVEs increased by 10.8 million in just 5 years. The average annual income for TVE workers is 12,000 RMB more than the farmer's average annual income. According to American Enterprise Institute, a 1% increase in parent income translates to a 0.3% increase in child income. This income increase allows people to access education and healthcare. TVEs also account for 40% of the total expenditure in rural areas for schools, roads, healthcare services, and pensions for the disabled and elders. Subpoint C, remittances. Transportation provides access to high-income urban jobs for migrant workers. According to Scientific Data 2018, new transportation modes have become the biggest determinant for migration in China. The Journal of Comparative Economics suggests migration increases household income per capita by 8.5% to 13.1%. As Sun 2016 shows, a 1% increase in access to high-speed rails can lead to a 3.4% increase in income. The migrant workers will further help their hometowns' poverty by sending back remittances saved from their high-income jobs in the cities. Increasing remittances have two impacts. One, education. Yuval Wellesley University 2019 says that remittances increase the likelihood of rural children being enrolled in school by 43.6%. Two, healthcare. According to John, 75.4% of patients from rural areas have not been hospitalized when necessary. Remittances can help the poor pay for medical care. Condition 3, education. Education is crucial to sustainable poverty alleviation. Global Citizen found an individual's income increases by 10% with every year of education. However, according to Project Partner, nearly 3/4 of rural schools were closed in 2015. The number of students enrolled in rural schools fell to 28.9 million, as those students cannot travel long distances due to poor transportation. According to Anne, many rural students drop out from high school because of the low-quality teaching instead of just the cost or tuition. Paying for these students' tuition cannot help them if they cannot even pass the entrance exams in the first place. To pass these entrance exams, we need to provide them with high-quality education. As stated by China Daily, poor job satisfaction in rural teaching results in a high turnover rates of quality rural teachers. Without funding on infrastructures or providing high-quality salaries, the poor living and teaching conditions cannot attract talented teachers to work for rural schools. Thus, we negate today's resolution. Thank you.
Okay, crossfire.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Our time starts now. How can you make sure that without vocational training, these low-skilled workers can fit to the job vacancies and actually do the e-commerce that you mentioned in your case?
Well, we tell you that you don't have to do e-commerce. And also, even if you do want to tell e-commerce, we're not telling you that you have to have, for example, have a lot of degrees in the internet. We tell you that you can simply, for example, provide agriculture. However, the agriculture can only be sent and out of the cities and provided to the people in the cities or sold to other people only through transportation. Now, moving on to our question for you. So when we talk about how there's going to be the aging population, so how do you pay for pensions if it's based off the taxes provided by the currently unemployed people?
Firstly, we're not saying that all these taxes are being paid on the current unemployed people. It definitely comes from the people who are working and pay taxes. What's more important?
Yeah, so how are these people going to work though?
Yeah, because firstly, in this debate, we're not considering about costs in both roles, because if you're advocating for where these costs come from in both roles, then there's no way to increase spending in both the growth of welfare and the
Wait, hold on. That's not what I'm talking about, though. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm asking you is, how are you going to be able to increase spending if you're not going to employ people, though? Because it's the money from the employed people that you're getting the pensions from, right?
Firstly, we're telling you that in our case, we are helping these people to get employed with the vocational education. Secondly, we're saying that currently there are enough people who are paying the taxes. The thing is that the rural workers get less pension even if they pay enough pension at their working age. Like for example, if I work to 60 years old and I pay a lot of taxes, but after I retired, I only receive 119 RMB, while the people in urban area receive more than 1,000 yuan. That is the gap that we're trying to make up for. So the thing is, there are people paying taxes. Okay, move on to my question.
Thank you.
So in your case, talking about education, but by our definition, according to the balance, education is actually accounted to welfare. So how does that relate to the spending in infrastructure?
Okay, however, when you use your piece of evidence, it's completely abusive to simply say that the entire sector of education is fully under welfare. We tell you on our side that in order to access education, it's not just about providing, for example, money to get you into school. Because just because you are in school, in order to get into high school, for example, you have to pass your exams. No matter how much money you have, if you don't pass your exams, then you can't get into high school. So that's on our side, we provide the solution with infrastructure where we tell you that in order to attract good quality teachers, to provide good quality teaching, you have to have good infrastructure and high salaries, which goes into employment infrastructure, which is also under the entire infrastructure sector.
Are you saying that you're using the good infrastructure to attract good teachers? How does that
first of all, yes. First of all, it is the teaching conditions and the environment. Second of all, it's the working salaries, which is put under infrastructure because it's employment human infrastructure. Now moving on to our question for you. So how much vocational training do we lack if you already tell us that so many people are already employed?
We're saying that currently there are job vacancies that still exist. So there are people who need these jobs, and that is how we are training these people.
Okay,
sorry, time is up. Thank you.
Okay, time's up. And rebuttal speech.
I'd like to ask for a 1-minute running prep. Thank you. Okay, I can stop the prep. Okay, is everybody ready? Then I'd like to start my rebuttal. Right. Now, first of all, an overall analysis. Today's most essential and vital link should be increased spending, yet in most of their case, we actually rarely see the word increased spending in any of their contentions. They lack this essential mechanism, so we can just call their entire case ineffective overall. Okay, moving on to their contentions one by one. First of all, they talk about economic growth. Their impact on this contention is simply twofold. First of all, low-skill jobs. Second of all, agricultural farmlands for villagers. Okay, one by one. First of all, poor people don't actually need low-salary jobs, as our opponents suggested. They need better ones provided by vocational education. We tell you that nearly 3/4 of China's rural poor live in households where every member has the ability to work, and 97% live in households with at least 2 members who are able to work. Only 7% of the rural poor lack the capacity to work. Poverty is more closely correlated with low levels of education. The problem is people not having jobs enough for them to live above the poverty line. However, we solve by using vocational education to provide them higher levels of skills, fill into better job vacancies, and actually do something to solve the issue. That's what we're saying. Second of all, agricultural farmlands. They wrongly assume all the farmers are poor people. This debate is focusing on the effectiveness of poverty alleviation, that whichever team proves the increased spending will actually help more people get out of poverty should win this debate. Therefore, in your final decision, you need to vote for the specific impacts on the poor population instead of all social impacts. Since my opponents never actually specify their impacts to the poor people, judge do not buy this contention. We have the second contention about transportation. They have 3 subpoints one by one. First of all, e-commerce, 2 responses. First of all, we have enough and we do not need increased spending. According to the Xinhua News Agency, more than 40 billion yuan has been invested in the construction of 4G services. The 4G network coverage of China Mobile in villages exceeds 98%. The reason why the number of internet users still remain low and e-commerce still doesn't work is due to the fact they can't afford buying a cell phone, or they don't have the related knowledge to either surf online or utilize the available applications. According to New York Times 2018, 480 million people in China said they did not go online because they didn't know how. Hence, building more infrastructure infrastructure does not actually solve the problem at all. Okay, I like to combine their tourism and their local transportation argument and say that we actually have enough on this too, and we do not increase spending. According to the People Say in 2020, the coverage of China's railway network in cities and rural roads in rural areas with a population of more than 20,000 has already expanded from 94% in 2012 to 98% in 2019. We literally have enough. Do not believe them. Do not increase spending on this. Moving on to the third point about migration and urban jobs. A few responses. First of all, they wrongly assume all the jobs will literally just go to the poor. Generating jobs overall does not equal to poor people actually getting the jobs specifically. There are 16.6 million people in poverty in China by the end of 2018, yet there are 170 million unemployed people. This number does not even include the retired ones. It's a 1 to 10 ratio. I would principally assume the jobs will go into the 1 in 10 to poverty, not considering less skills, education, or access. Therefore, their impact is completely insignificant. In contrast, we directly fill 15 million poor into job vacancies already by 2019, and by increased spending, the number have the potential to gradually raise to 90 million, so we win on this too. Now, finally, move on to our education contention. First of all, we would like to turn their impact and say educational welfare matters more because the poor kids are dropping off school due to unaffordability, but not a lack of educational resources. According to a book called the China Quarterly, December 2015, poor students are more likely to drop out because they're more profoundly affected by the cost of continuing their education. Indeed, the tuition fees for academic high school in China, which is the highest in the world, are known to impose a significant burden on many rural families, as they talked about. That's why we like to turn their impact and say virtually we benefit education by increasing spending on welfare program, providing subsidies for these poor families. Studies have found that offering students in rural China tuition subsidies for remaining in junior high school are matriculated into high school significantly. For example, we reduced dropout rate for rural or junior high schools by around 60%, and we use vocational education, like I emphasized many times, actually solve the problem of unemployment, age crisis, and what they talked about, so we turned their impact successfully. According to all the reasons above, we urge a very strong pro ballot. Thank you very much.
Can we please take running prep?
Okay.
I can start now. Is anyone not ready? Great. My time will start now. First of all, looking at their first contention about aging population, let's just look at the bigger picture. They talk about how it's essential for them to get 1,200 RMB per month in order for these poor people to live. And then they say they're benefiting 500 million people, which amounts to more than 600 billion yuan per every single month. You're spending 600 billion yuan every single month. This is simply non-sustainable and non-feasible for the government to sustain. But then they talk about in the class that admitted that enough people are paying for the pensions. If enough people are paying, where's the deficit? If there's no deficit, then we shouldn't even increase spending in the first place. They talk about the root cause as inequality. If the root cause is inequality, then we should increase the income of these people. As we told you, that TVs increase your income by 12,000 RMB more than a farmer's annual income. By increasing the income, these poor people can pay more into their pension funds and therefore get more pensions when they're old. We see increased spending simply doesn't solve the problem. China Labor Bulletin tells you that in order for workers to access pension benefits in the first place, they need to contribute up to 8% of their income in their personal insurance pool, meaning that the more you pay when you're young, the more you get. Increased spending from the government doesn't make any sense since you're paying the pension yourself. If you're pulling out money from the state assets and directly giving it to poor, then that's creating a whole new reform, not increasing spending into pensions themselves. When our posts never even prove to you the lack of current spending right now. And moving on, they talk about how many disabled people are not getting the benefits and therefore are poor. First of all, we minimize that argument because according to China's Disabled People Federation, there's only around 480,000 disabled people remaining in poverty at the end of last year, compared to more than 7 million in the late 2013, meaning that most of them already got job opportunities. But second, we see that infrastructure solves better because essential of them is getting into these mainstream schools and getting more facilities that can accommodate them in the normal schools. According to Human Rights Watch, about 28% of students with disabilities in their compulsory education
education years do not go to school, often because there's either no accommodation for them to listen along in the mainstream schools, or that specialized schools are too far away. We tell, in fact, only 7% of mainstream schools in China enroll students with disabilities and had funding to provide appropriate classroom accommodations such as visual aids, braille, and electronic materials, or even elevator ramps. We see that we should not simply give them subsidies. Instead, we should increase their income by increasing the quality of education that these people can get only by increasing the facilities. But second, we see that public infrastructure only helps the disabled, while their welfare simply has no solvency for this. According to Sixto, although care facilities for people with disabilities exist in major centers like Shanghai, such as the rehabilitation our opponents talk about, many lack the capacity, space, and equipment to even meet the needs of those who are with the most severe disabilities. Even in Shanghai, there are currently no public healthcare centers designed especially for those with intellectual disabilities and mental disorders. So we prove that simply increasing welfare and putting these people into these rehabilitation centers doesn't prove anything, because they're not even getting the beds, not getting the facilities that can ensure them to get a living. But then finally, to talk about vocational training. First of all, we see that vocational training, they didn't prove to you the lack of vocational training. They told you that 15 million people were trained into 2019. So we just keep this budget and increase a year-on-year basis. In a matter of 2 years, 13 million people will be trained. So there's simply no lack of vocational training, and they never proved to you why we should increase the spending, right? But second of all, we see that vocational training is often scammed with fake learning and results. According to Financial Times 20, multiple vocational schools in Chengdu surrounding cities, known for the large number of migrant job seekers, reported a surge in students for free training courses. The training boom, however, has not helped many unemployed workers find a job. Interviews with multiple vocational schools in Chengdu and neighboring cities show that just a tiny fraction of adults and students even secured relevant jobs within 3 months of graduation. Instead of teaching actual skills, the teacher paid more attention to making sure that they checked in by touching a fingerprint scanner so that they can report to the government rather than giving them a job. Our opponents never proved to you how many people are actually alleviated and how many people actually got long-term sustainable high-quality jobs because of vocational training. But second, we'll see that it's ineffective. According to CNBC, China's vocational schools is, rather than educating their students, simply they ship them off to work in factories as interns under conditions that violate Chinese labor laws, meaning that you're still only giving them low quality jobs. And simply because there's an increase in jobs doesn't mean that you solve every single one of them because of vocational training.
Okay, crossfire.
Sure. My point's ready? Excuse me, my point's ready?
Yeah.
Yes, ready.
Okay, so my first question starts now.
Oh, wait, sorry. I think there's
Excuse me,
something
your-
wrong with
Yeah, your internet
mic.
has some problem. Yeah.
It's like echoing a lot and have like really creepy voices.
I think it might be someone's echo. So would it be okay with like everyone closes their mic other than like the two who are speaking during Crossfire?
Yeah. So is everybody ready?
No.
My first question starts. My first
No,
question.
There's still
yeah.
problem with your mic.
Internet is
Maybe you
bad.
can try to re-enter.
It's me? Okay, sorry, just wait a sec. I'll try to adjust this.
Sorry, because we've experienced a similar problem in the past debates about a problem with the mic.
Yep, that's all right.
Okay, what about now?
Still there. Still has the echo.
Can I exit and re-enter the room? Sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah, that's all.
No,
That's
you
totally
can
fine.
enter a room again.
Okay, what about now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's okay.
It's okay, right? Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. If nobody's not ready, then I'm gonna start my first question now. Can you please restate your site solvency for aged population?
Our side solvency is to increase their incomes and tie their account to their kids' account so that they can reform the pension system and they can afford for pension themselves without spending $600 billion from the government every single month.
So you're basically suggesting a complete reform for the pension system because you're actually giving their descendants
right.
the money for them to get out of the poor before they actually fall into the poor poverty, right?
No, what we're simply saying is that
Okay.
the partner stated that enough people are paying for the pension, right? The problem is with the inequality. So how do you solve for this inequality? You increase the rural economy so that these people get more income and they can pay for more of their social insurance funds when they're younger.
Rural social insurance and
Okay,
rural
we'll
economy.
move on to the next
and
question.
micro. Sure. Do you have a question?
Okay. Yeah, so you talk about how internet is necessary for e-commerce. Why is the internet so necessary? Why can't the farmers work for people who have phones?
First of all, two responses. First of all, my rebuttal talked about how we already have enough internet coverage. Even second response, even though you ignore what I just said, we're talking about the poor. We're talking about the poor population today. Like these people have nothing to actually e-commerce with. They can't trade anything because they're poor.
They're farmers,
they have
right?
nothing
Farmers
to trade
have
for.
products.
Like how are you? Okay, you're talking about farmers' products for your e-commerce contention, or your first contention about economic growth?
In general, we talk about e-commerce. We tell you that these farmers are able to sell their products, and TVs are restricted because of deficient infrastructure. The only way for these businesses to sell their stuff is by increasing the roads. We're not talking about
I get what you
increasing
mean. I get what you mean, but hey, you have a logic fallacy. Like, how many of the farmers are actually poor? Like, if the farmers already have deposits and have something to actually sell, how are they categorized as the poor? Like, how many of the farmers you talked about are actually categorized as the poor
that this is
population?
actually efficient because we showed you a 2 billion RMB turnover, and as a result, 80% of townships and 32%
No,
of
you're not
poor
answering the
villages
question.
are
I'm
pulled out
asking
of poverty.
how many of.
Can you listen? We told you
Sorry.
that 80% of townships are lifted out of poverty, meaning that they were previously in poverty and we lifted them out. It's only a solvency card that shows you that it's feasible through e-commerce and tourism. Okay, move on to your question.
Sure. Okay, I'm gonna ask for the card later, but my question. Okay, so tell me how is your. Okay, so tell me how is your. So basically, for your third contention about education, you're suggesting we build more schools, or are you suggesting we build more educational legal assistance stations, like for the students, right? Can you give me the
we're not
word?
talking about stations. We're talking about facilities for the disabled people, right?
Facilities for the schools. So
what
yeah.
are you? We're talking about increasing the facilities through infrastructure. For example, giving them staircases and giving them ramps and giving them visual aids and screens that they can actually use in these schools and building up more schools.
How are you gonna
tell you that currently people are dropping out because there's no schools in many locations for these disabled people, and there's not enough disabled centers for these people's access. The only solution lies on the con side by increasing the facilities.
But how are you literally going to solve the problem if people cannot even afford the school's fees in the first place, right?
Time's up. Summary speech.
We would like to run 55 seconds of prep time starting now. Thank you.
Uh, 45 seconds.
We will 10 seconds more. Thank you. Okay, I'll stop my prep time. Off-time roadmap, we'll go our case, then their case. If there's no one already, then my time starts now. As pro side, we are focusing on the most vulnerable group on today's debate. So when we are discussing about arguments about education, increasing economy, and migrant workers, we should all focus on the most vulnerable group, which is the absolute poverty. Can they actually help these groups of people? First, look at our case. When our first winning point is about pensions. We tell you that pensions increasing funding are necessary when there's increasing number of poor people and the elderly in rural areas only receive 119 RMB. Their solvency is that increasing income. income. However, that is fundamentally false because not all taxes paid by workers are used in pension system. They are being spent in other welfare such as military. So that is how they cannot simply solve the problem of pension system by increasing the income of these people. So that is why in order to help to solve the deficit of the 534 billion yuan by 2020, we need to increase spending in the pension system. This is an urgent problem that we should deal with in the status quo. If they're saying that they're changing the system, and that is actually asking for a reform and not allowing today's debate. Now on to our second winning point is about vocational education. We tell you that we can actually help 90 million people to fit into the job vacancies by providing with specific skills. That is a prerequisite about all discussions about e-commerce and other jobs. Now on to our point about disabled people. We tell you that when they're telling you providing about facilities, these facilities have to be paid, and in order to pay these facilities, these disabled people should be rich enough to pay for this. If they're saying that they're providing free facilities, then it actually is counted in our side as welfare because they are free. Now on to their case. Their biggest impact is about how these transportation have helped the farmers, but we tell you that currently only 2% of the population cannot access to railway. That is why we see no reason why we should increase spending in transportation. Secondly, we tell you that there's problem of oversupply. Farmers cannot be helped. For example, garlic, potatoes, onions, and other storage stocks increased by more than 40% year on year. That is why there are more and more supply for these farming products. That actually in the market, these food become cheaper and lower the income of these farmers. That is why we tell you that these farmers are being hurt because they're receiving less money for their products. Our products are not helping the most vulnerable people at all. Move on to your point about education. We're telling you that before considering about the high school education, first we are considering about the dropout students who are the most vulnerable and in the absolute poverty. That is why at first place, we have to make sure they are able to afford the school, and then we consider the high quality education. That is why only our side provided vast solvencies that make these people can access good schools. Secondly, to the migrant workers, we're telling you that we don't want the migrant workers to access the low-skilled jobs provided by our opponents, or else they're still going to fall into poverty. That is why we're increasing the pension for them, that after they retire, they can receive equal pension as the one who are in the urban area. Because currently, they're also paying a lot of taxes, but when they are old, they just don't receive enough money. Overall, our 500 million elderly people are win. Thank you.
Okay, concise.
Can we please run our prep time? Thank you.
A minute left.
Okay, we're ready. Okay. Okay, so is anyone not ready? Okay, time starts Now, again, reinforcing our framework, we believe that self-sustaining is the most important thing that we should do, even when it comes to poverty alleviation. Now, moving on to the main clashes here. First of all, on education, our opponents first tell us how they have to pay for tuition, and that's why they're dropping out of school. However, we tell you that, first of all, 9-year free compulsory education already is provided, and if they're still dropping out of this 9-year free compulsory education, this only shows that the welfare programs are not working. Second of all, and we tell you that we are actually advocating for even more, because we're telling you that high school is provided on our site, where you can actually increase your income by 10% with every year of education you're provided with. We tell you that infrastructure comes first, because when they tell us how they're going to, for example, provide education before high quality, we tell you that high quality comes first, because in order to get into high school, you have to pass the entrance exams, and before entrance exams, you have to go to, for example, primary school. And so thus, the most important thing here is that we need to increase the amount of education and the quality of education in primary school so that people can even pass the entrance exams. We tell you that 50% of people currently can't even pass the entrance exams because of the poor quality education. So how do we solve for this? We tell you that we're actually able to provide more people with better high quality education through attracting teachers, where you provide them with higher salaries and good teaching conditions in these infrastructure areas, so they will actually come and move over and teach these rural students. Now, moving on to the next point here, which is on employment and economy. Looking at our opponent's side, they tell us that there's going to be vocational training. However, first of all, again, like we said, they don't show how there's a lack of spending, because if every single year you're spending the same amount of money and pulling 15 million people out of poverty every single year, then we don't show why we need to, then our opponents don't show why we need to increase the amount of spending that's actually used. They also don't show us how many people are employed and how effective vocational training is, so thus this point completely drops. Now, looking at the responses to our side, they first talk about e-commerce and tell us how there's no internet coverage, how there's enough internet coverage. However, nowhere in our entire case did we talk about internet coverage at all. Our e-commerce mechanism here isn't about internet. We're talking about the transportation. In order to move, for example, agricultural products out of these areas, you have to have transportation and low logistic costs, which are only provided on our side. Second of all, looking at the response to rural businesses, we tell you that they said that on our opponent's side, they said that there's no lack of spending anymore. However, we tell you that TBEs, a quarter of them are still restricted by the fact that they don't have infrastructure. Third of all, remittances, they said our migrants don't get enough income. We tell you that it is enough, because we tell you that 3,500 RMB compensation can pull a family of 5 out of poverty. And on our side, we tell you that TBEs provide 12,000 RMB more than the farmer's average annual income. So thus, this is clearly enough to pull a family of 5 out of poverty. So thus, we do pull people out of poverty. Now, finally, looking at the vulnerable people. First of all, on pensions, we tell you that the entire system is corrupt. 85% of the money that is spent into pensions is actually wasted. Second of all, we tell you that $7 trillion spent RMB spent every year is not actually feasible. And on our side, we tell you that instead the employees are actually paying for it, and this isn't asking for reform, because pensions are already paid by by these people through taxes. Second of all, on the disabled and elders, we talk about providing accommodations that are built into the schools, where we talk that only 7.7% of schools have these accommodations right now. So thus, we should increase this amount of accommodations, and thus we stand on con.
Okay, time's up. And the crossfire.
Okay, so time starts now. How can farmers be helped when transportation actually lowered the price of their products?
Why would transportation lower the price of the product? Simply because there's access to potatoes doesn't mean that rural potatoes wouldn't sell out. There's no
We're
logic
saying
there.
that the demand increases that actually lower the market price for these products. That is why they're receiving less money for their same products.
Okay, but wouldn't it be better to, for example, provide some sort of income to these people when there are certain people that don't even have any source of income right now in rural areas?
Or when we compare making their product just stay in their, for example, on the farmland and not be able to sell out, and even if it's at a low cost, they're at least selling out their products and self-sustaining these farmers themselves. And we provide an actual solvency for them to increase their income rather than for them to just live and receive subsidies. Okay, move on to our question. You talk about how 60% of students drop out of high school. Why does it matter if 50% of students aren't even able to get into these high schools because they're not able to pass the tests?
Wait, 50% of the people aren't actually able to pass the test. That's what the reason is. Firstly, we strongly negate that. I literally spent 1 minute in my rebuttal telling you that the fundamental reason is the students are not actually being able to afford high school education. That means even if they pass the test, they do not have enough money to actually attend the school. That's the reason we need to increase funding on virtually educational welfare rather than what you talk.
Can we add on? However, so basically when you talked about how you're supposed to, for example, get them the money to get into high school before passing the exams, isn't it more important so that that the current amount of money that they're paying for example, primary school, and this amount of education is high quality, so they can actually at least pass the exams before even considering the amount of money you spend on high school?
Right back to you. Okay, we get you. Right back to you. We get what you mean, but your solution is basically like increasing salaries for teachers to attract them into better
That's not our
schools. But
only
however,
solution, right?
how in any way is increasing salaries for teachers public infrastructure?
All right, first of all, we tell that we give you a couple of links. First of all, on the teacher link, we tell you that in many of these schools, they have cramped dormitory, cramped teaching facilities. None of the urban teachers will want to go there. On our second link, we tell the remittances increased likelihood of rural children being enrolled into school by 43.6%. Yours had never told us why money given by the government is better than the money earned. Third of all, we tell that we increase the graduation rate by 80% when we close and smaller the class sizes and make class people able to concentrate in class when the class is way smaller. So we provide multiple links, not just that only one.
Sure, but many teachers don't go to the rural areas only because the overall environment is not good enough. How can you make sure that only by improving the environment of a school can attract teachers to rural areas to actually
Yeah,
help
you can't just say the only factor for teachers not willing to teach in
we're
rural
not saying
areas
it's the only
because there
factor.
are not enough facilities.
Yes,
Yeah,
we tell you
yeah.
that's not the only factor. When it comes to infrastructure, we tell you that the definition of infrastructure also includes the human embodiment of skill. And the human embodiment of skill includes the teachers at this point. So when it comes to teachers, if you're providing them with higher salaries, then thus it's actually human infrastructure.
It's not assuming
that skills and
Okay, time's up.
education are included in welfare.
Time's up.
Okay, thank you.
Friend of
I would like to use all the prep time left. Thank you. Okay, you can stop the prep. Is everybody ready? Then I'd like to start my final focus. Now, throughout this entire debate, they still don't even tell you once in any of their contentions why should we increase spending in any of their cases. They don't even see their entire cases trend themselves. Therefore, overall, you can vote for us simply on this issue. Now, moving on to 3 voting issues line by line. First of all, they literally talked about sustainability and long-term effects in their entire framework. Okay, let's analyze that. The most long-term and important issue in today's debate is aged population. And we grant you with a 25% of aged people already living below the poverty line and a 500 million impact overall. This trend is increasing exponentially and will do in the future. Let's look at our opponent's solvency. They talk about reform for the pension system, providing their descendants with occupations, therefore helping the aged. 2 important reasons why this doesn't work. First of all, they're ignoring the group of aged people that do not have any descendants. Second, the time frame of the solvency is incredibly long. You first give job opportunities that might not even get to the poor descendants, then expect them to provide back to their parents. There are simply too many uncertainties in this entire process. As compared to that, our solution is urgent, effective, in need for increased spending, a clear pro-win on this. Take this in your flow. Second of all, transportation against vocational education. Their link is farmers trading items through e-commerce, but their card is about how that lifts people out of poverty. There is a direct skipping in this warrant. Poor people living under the poverty line, they have nothing to trade actually in the first place. Their tourism impact only gets the people already with deposits, but not poor, but doesn't actually reach today's resolution. Instead, for vocational education, as we talked about, as social welfare program across China, we tell you that the unemployed need vocational education to train their skills and increase their competitiveness because these works all need specific requirements. We already achieved an impact of 15 million poor of getting occupations. And why do we need increased spending? Sustainability and balance between vacancies and the unemployed. The warrant, the link, the impact all provided. Third of all, for education, they throw the burden to us talking about the 9-year compulsory education. Okay, they want to increase the quality of education. How literally is increasing salaries of teacher public infrastructure? It's not. If anything correlated, it could only be welfare, but definitely not infrastructure. Environment is never the only factor teachers who refuse to teach in rural areas. Money is the definite issue for many students not receiving high-level education. For all the reasons above, we strongly urge a pro ballot. Thank you very much.
Okay, Comsci.
We'll run all the remaining prep time. Thank you.
Your time's up.
Okay. Is anyone not ready? Great. My final focus will start now. Starting with framework, since our opponents conceded with our sustainability framework throughout their entire final focus, we'll just go by sustainability. We tell that sustainability is important because the government simply cannot afford to spend 600 billion yuan every single month on people with pensions, and our opponent simply hasn't proven why it's feasible in the status quo and why this can actually go on for a long-term period. When we tell that 1% increase in high-speed roads, which is public infrastructure, can lead to 3.4% increase in income. But then moving on to the clash point in today's debate. First of all, we tell about employment. We see that currently, according to Thornton 18, local transportation infrastructure is cited by nearly a quarter of Chinese businesses as a constraint on income growth, meaning that currently the quality of these roads are simply not enough, and the access to these roads are currently restraining the development of TVs. And we tell that currently increasing spend is feasible, as we see after increasing spending on TVs, we currently see that 10.8 million increase in TVs were as a result because infrastructure improved. And we tell that average annual income for a TV worker is 12,000 RMB more than a farmer's annual income. Our opponent tells us that there's an access in the jobs. However, they never taught us why the access of the job is in the rural areas where the poor people can access. And we tell that currently only by increasing access of jobs for these people in the rural areas can we increase the spending. And they never told you why we should increase vocational training and why there's a lack in the first place. They tell you the second issue here is education. We give you several links. First of all, we tell them because currently these 50% of these kids cannot even pass the high school entrance exam in the first place. Dropouts don't matter if education cannot even be accessed in the first place because of quality education. And we tell you that we solve for because a smaller classing results a higher than 80% increase chance of graduation. But then even on the affordability issue, we also solve this because of remittances. Wesleyan University 19 tells us that remittances increase the likelihood of rural children being enrolled into school by 43.6%. It is the only way for them to access education. But our opponents never prove to you why money and subsidy given by the government is effective when we currently tell you that people are being enrolled 43.6% of them because of these remittances given by poor people. And even when we look at disability, we still tell you that 7.7% of schools do not even have disability accommodation when they clearly are taking in disability students, meaning that there's no solvency on the process simply by giving subsidies to these people. Thus, we negate. Sorry.
Thank you.
I think we have a decision now. It's a 4-1 vote for Kansai. So congratulations, YK Paul, you have won this debate. I think the 4 judges from Kansai can give our feedback before the other judge give her feedback for the pro side, so I can start over. I think this is in general a really good debate and everyone did a really good job. I'm just gonna point out some of the problem I see in both sides that I think both sides could work on in the future. If starting with pro side, I think you have given us very good explanation on your education and vocational training point, and also on your like how you're going to help the vulnerable people. But the first problem is that I don't I don't see you have very strong response to your opponent's rebuttal to your case when they talk about there could also be like public facilities for the disabled and for the elderly. Like you could spend more, like address that point more instead of just telling us people don't have the money to afford private sector because there indeed have public sectors. But secondly, I think I need some on your vocational training point. I think that is indeed a very strong point. Is in particular when you talk about poor people already have jobs, except that those jobs are just really poor. Those jobs have really low income and they're often exploited. I think if you could give us more evidence on why many poor people already have low skill job, but like the only way like providing them with more like low income job or low skill job is not enough for them to lift them out of poverty, but instead could possibly push them into further exploitation. I think that could potentially make your argument much stronger, and or even potentially for you to win over this way. But moving on to the con side, I think one of the things you could talk about when your opponent talk about people don't have the money to afford high school so that they drop out is that you could give us find more evidence on why students drop out in higher education or just in the 9-year compulsory education. But secondly, I think you could talk about existing national financial aid program that could support the students, and this could lies on both sides. For Kansai, you could talk about the existing financial aid. Is enough, don't need further funding, but then that could serve as an incentive for students to work harder in school, and then as an incentive to perform better in high school or in university entrance exam. And therefore, you tell us by providing better schools and better education resources, these students have better chances at winning this financial aid, etc., etc. I think that could potentially make your point stronger. But similarly, for the pro side, if you want to talk about financial aid program, you could talk about why, give us example and explanation to tell us why there are like the existing program are not sufficient to support this student, which is the reason why they often drop out from higher education. You need more funding on that and things like that. But secondly, it's about continuing schools and government subsidized care and facility. I think it's just a matter of sentence. I think you need to just specify with one sentence saying that there are public facilities, like people don't need to pay, or they just need to pay very little to get into those like care facility for the elderly or those continuing schools for disabled students, etc. I think if you could specify that could make our judging decisions much easier. But other than that, this is a really good debate. I really enjoyed this, and I think I could leave it to the next judge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will probably just go for the next one. So I think actually it's a really close debate. I really love the pro side second speaker, your rebuttal, and your final focus. I almost vote for you, but I think for the con side you win on the education points, because at the end of the day I buy your arguments about the solvency order of prioritizing the quality, the teaching quality of the students first of all, and the pro side wins on the commerce points, but I think like you guys can probably work on the transportation points because the argument and the defense that you give in the crossfire seems a bit off. Also like the pro side can work on the agriculture point because in the later part of the debate you seem like drop the things instead of like and sometimes the way that you were like defending your own argument seems to avoid directly answering and responding to the con side's arguments. The con side also, I think like con side can work on the reform to solvency for the pension because I feel like the feasibility seems a little bit off. But overall, I think the con side provides us with a more competent and coherent performance. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna go next. I think that I also tend to agree with what the previous judges have already said, but then again, I'll say that Paul, I personally had some problems with the way you rebutted your opponent's arguments. I felt they were not more direct, and you were sort of running away or avoiding some of the arguments that your opponent stated. And I would also say that you should be more attentive so that you get the exact arguments that your opponent is talking about. Because I remember there was a point where you kind of mentioned the internet when that was not what your opponent mentioned. Also, I feel that the two teams, both pro and con, can work on your education points. Both of the evidences that you provided were all in 2015. It's been 5 years now, so I'm assuming that there has been like some new reforms and new development in the education system in China. So both of you can actually work on the education system. Also, I was expecting Pro to sort of address the inefficiencies in the vocational training or vocational education that Con stated, but you failed to actually also address that. So you could also work on that. And then one last thing would be, I was a bit confused with what exactly Pro you were talking about. Are you talking about pensions or you're talking about taxes? I think that there's a difference between what pensions are and what taxes are. So if it's your main point, you should be able to understand how the mechanism works. But if you're not able to like properly explain it, then it sort of questions your whole like contention on that. So you could also work on that. Regardless, it was an excellent debate, and then both teams did really well.
Thank you. I'll just gonna add a few more feedbacks. I don't think either the pro side or the con side win on the sustainability point, because the con side kept saying that on the pro side they talk about, you know, if you add more spending, that's gonna be like 600 billion for the government to spend every month. And then the pro side actually never answered to this rebuttal. And also on the pro side, you guys talked about how the reform can be very uncertain. And so I don't think either side really win on this point. But onto the pros rebuttal, I actually think the rebuttal was a bit too shallow in for a rebuttal to be, because your only response to their agriculture point was that not all farmers are in poverty. So that's your only response. But I think that is not enough as a solid response. You should give out your own statistics of, you know, how many farmers are in poverty, or you should ask them to provide the number instead of just saying that, you know, not all farmers are in poverty and thus this argument doesn't stand. And also for, what is it? Let me see. Oh, also for migration and creating jobs, your response was that not jobs are going to the poor people. But if it's not backed by evidence or like empirics, I don't know if it's this true or not. If they said it in their constructive speech with a piece of evidence, you have to have another piece of evidence in order for you to say that it is not true. Also on the education point that you guys have been talking about throughout the debate, how like, you know, is the quality matters more, or is it that, oh, you have to pass the exam to in order to enter high school? I think one way the pro can really answer this question is that if you have to pass, if you don't even have the money to access to, the previous education for you to enter the exam, for you to pass the exam, how are you going to enter, a better education? But I was anticipating for the pro side to just add like one more sentence responding to the con side's answer, but you guys didn't do that. I think it can be easily rebutted because there's actually a big logical fallacy in the con's response, but you guys didn't really talk about it. So I have to give the education point to the con side. And also, I think the pro side, you guys really have to focus on how and why do we need to increase spending on vocational training. Of course, there are many benefits vocational training give out, but you have to explain why do we have to increase spending. But I think it was a really close debate. I think both sides did really good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Lastly, because I'm the only one that vote for pro, and so I'm just gonna be quite brief. So first of all, I think this is a really, really close run. And I was almost convinced by con, like especially towards our final focus. But eventually, I still vote for pro as a consideration of like throughout the debate. So I think both teams have done a really good job in like explaining and regarding like debating skills. So like the main voting issues for me till the end is just on like the clashes and how both teams present this kind of like picture on the clashes on, for example, education, disability, and employment. Why vote for pro? I think the main reasons is that I think till the end of the day they are, at least for me, presenting a more realistic picture of what are the possible causes behind that and how their cases could provide that sovereignty for this kind of problems. So for example, on the education point, I think I've heard quite a lot of responses coming from both sides and also from Kang when you are saying that, for example, quality or like teachers is like more important under this kind of circumstances. But why I still credit that clash to pro like at the end is that I still kind of like by their arguing and their like responses, I think till the end of the day, like quality is probably not the utmost important thing for those people, especially in extremely poverty. So I think in some of the points and also like employment, when like even if they like how could they possibly get that job if they're like low skilled, and how like what is the more likely way for those poor people to like, can they possibly get a job, or can they, even if they get a job, it may be like less than sufficient for them to even sustain their livings. So I think till like considering the sort of issues, I am sort of persuaded by pros like contentions and arguing on this specific like clashes, which I think present to me a more realistic picture of what the world is likely to look like. So, but yeah, anyway, in the end, I think for pro, try to improve a bit more on the rebuttal of your opponent's points, and as well as the weighings of the impacts. I think it's a little bit lack of responses for your opponent's points, and also try to defend your own cases, especially after their rebuttal, like in the latter half of the debate. And for con, I think a little bit lack of logical links in between. So it seems to me a bit vague regarding like what is your ultimate impacts at the end of the day. I know that you're talking about like self-sustainability, but try to make it more like tangible and in a way that I think how your system works and what are the underlying problems behind the status quo, that and how well your case necessarily solve this sort of problems. Yeah, but overall I think this is a really close and good debate. So congratulations to both teams for being here, and congratulations to pro as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, judges, and thank you, opponents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Congratulations.
Bye.